You really are nothing more than an old, dusty maid, aren't you? Vanessa Sinclair's voice cut through the grand foyer like a jagged blade. I've told you repeatedly, this mansion deserves better than having to look at you. Know your place, Lorraine. You're an embarrassment to this estate's new image. Without a flicker of hesitation, Vanessa tipped the heavy, gallon-sized bucket of industrial white paint. It hit Lorraine Mitchell with a sickening, wet thud, coating her from her graying hair to her sensible orthopedic shoes in a thick, suffocating layer of white. Lorraine stood motionless, the paint dripping slowly from her eyelashes, staining her uniform as the silence in the room became absolute. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. If you love stories about resilience, powerful justice, and redemption, please subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. The air in the Whitmore estate turned stagnant. The only sound was the rhythmic drip 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 of paint striking the imported Italian marble, forming a stark, messy puddle at Lorraine's feet. Decorators, painters, and caterers froze in mid-motion. A few early arrival guests, holding crystal flutes of champagne, stepped back, their expressions shifting from amusement to profound, horrified discomfort. Vanessa, however, merely checked her manicure, her expression one of bored indifference. There, she hummed, turning to a cowering interior decorator. That's much better. The foyer was lacking a certain modern chaos, wasn't it? Quote, Lorraine remained a statue of forced composure, her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. But she did not scream. She did not throw the bucket back. Nor did she hurl insults to match Vanessa's venom. She closed her eyes, wiped a glob of paint from her eyelid with a shaking hand, and bowed her head. I am so sorry, Miss Sinclair, she whispered, her voice trembling but unbroken. I will clean this up immediately. I apologize for the inconvenience. Apologies don't fix the lack of class you bring into this room. Lorraine, Vanessa snapped, her eyes darting to the guests as if seeking applause for her cruelty. You've been a fixture here far too long. You're outdated, like a piece of furniture that should have been discarded years ago. When Adrian and I are married, I am clearing out the old guard. You are first on the list. Around the room, the staff lowered their heads. The security detail shifted uncomfortably, and the caterers stared firmly at their trays. No one dared to defend her. Vanessa Sinclair was the future mistress of the house, a billionaire heiress whose favor was the only currency that mattered. To stand with Lorraine was to be cast into the same professional abyss. Lorraine didn't blame them. She knew the cost of standing up in a house built on such jagged pride. For 35 years, she had been the silent pulse of the Whitmore estate. She had been there when Adrian's parents were lost to the tragedy that scarred his youth. She had been the one to dry his tears, mend his clothes, and serve as the only consistent, maternal figure in his lonely, gilded life. She had sacrificed her own comforts, her own family milestones, and her own health to ensure the Whitmore legacy remained intact. Every paycheck she earned was already spoken for. It was the difference between her granddaughter, Maya, staying in medical school or being forced to abandon her dreams of becoming a doctor. Lorraine would endure 1,000 buckets of paint if it meant Maya wouldn't have to suffer the cold indifference of the world. Her pride was a small price to pay for that white coat. Slowly, Lorraine stooped down. Her knees popped, a sharp reminder of the decades she had spent scrubbing these floors. She retrieved the empty, dripping bucket, her knuckles white against the plastic. She didn't let a single tear fall, though the sting of the chemicals against her skin was nothing compared to the laceration of her soul. I'll have it clean in a moment, she repeated, her voice a hollow shell. She turned, her heavy, paint-caked footsteps marking a trail across the pristine floor as she navigated toward the Servants' hallway. She didn't see the heavy velvet curtains at the far end of the foyer shift. Adrian Whitmore had returned home hours early, hoping to surprise Vanessa before the gala, but he had entered through the private side wing, sensing a strange, heavy tension in the air. As he stepped into the foyer, he stopped dead. He saw the white splattered marble. He saw the guests, who looked like they had just witnessed a crime. And then, he saw the back of a woman he had known his entire life. A woman who walked with the heavy, defeated gait of a stranger, disappearing into the dark corridor, covered in the remnants of a cruelty he couldn't yet name. Adrian stood on the threshold, his breath hitching in his throat. He looked at the empty bucket discarded on the floor, then at Vanessa, who was laughing at something a guest had said, completely oblivious to his presence. A dark, dangerous storm ignited behind his eyes. He hadn't heard the words, but the sight of his childhood protector, broken and humiliated in his own home, was enough to turn the world to ice. Something terrible had happened, and he was going to find out exactly why. Adrian stood in the shadows of the arched doorway, his silhouette imposing, his presence initially unnoticed by the bustling room. He watched as Vanessa moved among the guests, her laughter bright and brittle, a sound that now grated against his nerves like metal on glass. The air in the foyer felt thick, heavy with the phantom scent of latex paint. Adrian's gaze tracked the irregular, wet white footprints leading away from the center of the room toward the rear service wing. Every step he took toward the center of the foyer felt like walking through a minefield. The decorators, catching sight of him, went rigid, their faces paling as they realized who was watching. Adrian. Vanessa turned, her smile widening as she spotted him. She swept toward him, oblivious to the icy mask he had pulled over his features. "You're early. You should have told me. I would have had the staff properly prepared. It's been such a chaotic afternoon. The help has been absolutely impossible today." Adrian didn't embrace her. He didn't even acknowledge the kiss she attempted to plant on his cheek. Instead, he stopped her with a single, sharp look, a look that held the terrifying, calm authority of the man who ran an empire. He looked past her, toward the hallway where Lorraine had vanished. "Why is there paint on the floor, Vanessa?" His voice was dangerously low, a calm before a hurricane. Vanessa waved a dismissive hand, her posture relaxed and arrogant. "Oh, don't worry about that. A little incident with the help. The housekeeper was being clumsy, and I had to correct her. She's getting older, Adrian. She's become a liability. You've been too lenient with her for far too long." A muscle in Adrian's jaw pulsed. He remembered the smell of lavender and antiseptic, the scent of the linen closets where Lorraine used to sit with him when he was a boy, soothing his nerves after a bad day at school. He remembered her hands, rough and worn from years of labor, placing a warm bowl of soup in front of him when the house felt too large and too cold. She had been the only one who didn't want anything from him. She had just been there. "Where is she?" Adrian asked, his voice steadying, growing colder. "Probably in the laundry room, crying about her dignity," Vanessa scoffed, turning back to the guests. "Honestly, darling, let's not dwell on the staff. We have a gala to host. I've already contacted an agency to send over some younger, more efficient replacements by tomorrow morning." Adrian didn't respond. He turned on his heel and strode toward the service wing. In the laundry room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Lorraine stood at a deep utility sink, scrubbing her uniform with a coarse brush. Her arms were raw, and the paint had hardened in her hair, pulling at her scalp with every movement. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps, trying to keep the tears from spilling over. She couldn't afford to fall apart. If she broke down now, the tremor in her hands wouldn't stop, and she wouldn't be able to finish the final preparations for the gala. One more year, she whispered to herself, the mantra acting as a shield. Just one more year for Maya. Just one more year. She heard the heavy door of the laundry room creak open. She froze, her shoulders hunching instantly. She didn't turn around. She couldn't bear for anyone to see the shame etched into her expression. I'm sorry, Lorraine said, her voice cracking. I know I'm late. I'll be back in the ballroom in 10 minutes. I just need to. Quote, Lorraine? Quote, the voice was not the sharp, demanding tone of a superior. It was deep, resonant, and thick with a sudden, haunting realization. Lorraine's breath hitched. She stopped scrubbing. Adrian stood in the doorway, his impeccably tailored suit a sharp contrast to the dingy. He saw the framed photograph of Maya in her graduation cap, propped up on a small shelf near the iron. He saw the worn-out notepad where she kept track of household expenses. Tell me what happened, Adrian said, his voice quiet but intense. Tell me exactly what happened. And do not lie to me. Lorraine looked up, her eyes wide and wet. The dignity she had maintained through the years flickered. She thought of Maya's tuition. She thought of the contract she had signed to stay until the end of the year. If she told him, Vanessa would have her fired in an instant. She would lose the income that kept her granddaughter's dream alive. It was nothing, sir, she whispered, looking down at the sudsy water. Just a mistake. I am an old woman. And I was clumsy. Miss Sinclair was just frustrated. It was my fault. Adrian felt a cold, jagged ache in his chest. He looked at her, the woman who had been his surrogate mother, and realized, with gut-wrenching clarity, that she was lying to protect him from the truth of the woman he had chosen to marry. He realized that the cruelty he had witnessed wasn't a singular event. It was a culture he had allowed to fester in his own house. It wasn't your fault, Adrian said, his voice trembling with a suppressed, building rage. Before Lorraine could answer, the door swung open again. One of the catering managers stepped in, looking nervous. Mr. Whitmore? Miss Sinclair is asking for you. She says the guests are waiting. And the room. Quote, get out, Adrian snapped, his head snapping toward the manager with such ferocity that the man stumbled back, nearly tripping over his own feet. Adrian turned back to Lorraine, his eyes dark, his mind racing. He had come home expecting a celebration. Instead, he had walked into the ruin of his own soul. He didn't know yet how he would dismantle the life he had built with Vanessa. But as he looked at the woman who had sacrificed everything for his family, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The gala was not going to continue as planned. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper, yet firm with a promise. Lorraine, go home. Take the night. Take the week. I will handle this. But the gala. Quote, forget the gala, Adrian said, his gaze fixed on the doorway where Vanessa stood, finally beginning to sense that something was wrong. The only thing that matters right now is the truth. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, a cloying sweetness that nauseated Adrian as he stepped back into the gala. The chandeliers threw a brilliant, cold light over the elite of Atlanta. Politicians, CEOs, and socialites, all gathered to witness a display of opulence that felt, in this moment, like a hollow shell. Vanessa glided toward him, her smile a practiced, gleaming arc. There you are, darling. Everyone is asking for you. You really must stop wandering off to deal with the help. It's so terribly. Quote, Adrian stopped, his movement so abrupt that Vanessa faltered. The music, a soft jazz ensemble, seemed to fade into a dull hum in the background. The room began to lose its focus, narrowing until only Vanessa remained in his field of vision. She looked stunning in her midnight blue silk gown, the embodiment of everything he was expected to value: beauty, status, and an impeccable public image. Where is she? Adrian asked, his voice low but carrying a weight that silenced the nearby conversations. Vanessa blinked, confused. Who? The old woman? I sent her to the basement to scrub the floors until she got the paint off. Why on earth are you still talking about her? Quote, Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet coldness radiating from him was far more terrifying than a shout. You didn't just correct her, Vanessa. You humiliated a woman who has given more to this family than you could ever comprehend. You chose to treat a human being like a discarded toy because she didn't fit the aesthetic of your evening. Vanessa's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing as she realized this wasn't about the staffer. It was about her power. She smoothed her dress, leaning in so the guests nearby wouldn't overhear, her tone dripping with condescension. Adrian, don't be dramatic. She's an employee, an antique piece of help that is overdue for a replacement. I am your future wife. My image is your image. If I look bad, you look bad. You don't honestly think I'm going to apologize to a housekeeper, do you? Quote, I don't expect you to apologize, Adrian said, his voice hard as iron. Because you don't have the capacity for it. He turned away from her, stepping onto the small dais where the microphones were set up for the evening's speeches. He motioned to the lead event planner, who was hovering nervously near the edge of the stage. Mr. Whitmore? The planner stammered. The program. Quote, change it, Adrian commanded. Bring up the feed from the hallway cameras. Now. Sir. That's private security footage, the planner countered, his eyes darting to Vanessa. Do it, Adrian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Unless you'd like to see how quickly I can dismantle this entire event. Vanessa's face paled. She lunged forward, grabbing Adrian's arm. Adrian, stop this. You're making a scene. You're embarrassing us in front of the board, the investors, everyone. If you do this, you're throwing away everything we've built. Adrian gently but firmly peeled her fingers off his arm. Everything you have built, Vanessa, is based on the idea that you are better than the people who serve you. You've spent months pushing me to replace the staff, telling me they're beneath us. But you never stopped to ask why they've stayed. He looked out over the crowd. The ballroom had gone deathly silent. The elite of Atlanta, the people who usually spent their nights gossiping about the failures of others, were now frozen, their eyes locked on the stage. For 35 years, Adrian began, his voice echoing through the massive room. Lorraine Mitchell has been the backbone of this house. When my parents died, it was her hand I held in the dark. When I was sick, it was her face I saw when I woke up. She stayed here not because she had to, but because she cared. She sacrificed her own life, her own family, her own comfort, to ensure that this estate, that I, was taken care of. He looked down at Vanessa, who was shaking now, her composure fracturing. And tonight, I watched you treat her with a level of cruelty that is not only beneath you. It is beneath anyone who dares to call themselves a human being. The giant screens at the back of the ballroom flickered to life. The high-definition security footage played out in grim detail. The pristine foyer, Vanessa's cold sneer, the heavy, wet thud of the paint bucket, and Lorraine's silent, shaking apology. The sound of the paint hitting the floor seemed to thunder through the speakers, magnified until it was the only thing in the room. Guests gasped. One woman covered her mouth with her hand, turning away in horror. A prominent investor, a man who had known Adrian's father, stared at the screen with a look of profound, visceral disgust aimed squarely at Vanessa. Vanessa stood on the stage, the reality of her social ruin dawning on her in real time. She looked around, searching for an ally, but found only cold, judgmental stares. This is just a misunderstanding, she started, her voice high and thin, cracking under the weight of the collective gaze. I'm the woman you chose. We have a future together. Quote, we had a future, Adrian corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. But that future required a partner with a heart. All I see now is a stranger. He signaled to the security team at the back of the room. Please escort Miss Sinclair out, and ensure she doesn't take anything that doesn't belong to her. The engagement is over. As security moved in, Vanessa's facade completely collapsed. She let out a sharp, jagged cry, but the room remained silent. She was led away, a trail of discarded designer heels and broken glass in her wake. Adrian stood alone on the dais. The room was still, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. He took a deep, steadying breath, his eyes searching the back of the room. Lorraine? He called out, his voice quiet. There was no answer. She was gone. She had slipped out, likely heading back to her modest home. Thinking she had been fired. Thinking her sacrifice had finally led to her ruin. Adrian's heart sank. He had won the battle. But he realized with a sickening thud that he had not yet found the person who mattered most. The ballroom felt like a tomb. The opulence that had defined the evening. The gold leaf moldings. The towering floral arrangements. The vintage champagne. Now felt grotesque. A gaudy backdrop to the cruelty that had just been stripped bare. Adrian jumped down from the dais, ignoring the murmurs of the elite as he shouldered his way through the crowd. He didn't care about the board members who were already whispering about the stock implications of his broken engagement. He didn't care about the social media feeds that were surely erupting with the video of Vanessa's downfall. All he could see was the image of Lorraine. Her head bowed, her gray hair matted with white paint, her shoulders hunched against a world that had forgotten her worth. Lorraine? He called out, pushing through the heavy velvet curtains into the service corridor. He checked the laundry room. It was empty. The utility sink was still damp, the coarse brush resting on the edge. But the room was silent. He rushed to the staff quarters, his heels thudding against the floorboards. He burst into her modest room, a small, clean space filled with memories of 35 years of service. A collection of photographs of Maya in her various stages of life. Kindergarten, high school, her first day at university. Adorned the walls. Everything was in its place. But the room felt abandoned. Lorraine's uniform, the one she had been wearing earlier, was draped over the back of a chair, still wet and stiff with drying paint. A wave of panic, colder and sharper than anything he had felt in years, washed over Adrian. He had acted too slowly. He had stood on the stairs, watching, while she had been broken. And now, she had vanished, likely carrying the weight of his family's failure on her shoulders. He turned and sprinted back toward the main entrance. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he dialed his private security chief. Find her, he barked, his voice raw. I don't care where she went. Check the security cameras. Check the rideshare logs. Check every inch of Buckhead. If she's not home, find her. He stepped out into the night air of Atlanta. The humidity of a Georgia summer hit him, thick and clinging. He wandered toward the parking area, hoping against hope to see her small, unassuming car. It wasn't there. A few minutes later, his security chief pulled up in a black SUV. Sir, we tracked her. She's at the bus station downtown. She was trying to board a late-night coach heading out of the city. Drive, Adrian commanded. The ride was a blur of neon lights and city traffic. Adrian sat in the back of the car, his head in his hands. He replayed the last 35 years in his mind. He realized that for all his talk of being a self-made entrepreneur, he had been a child of privilege in every way that mattered. He had been so busy building his empire that he had treated the person who held that empire together like an appliance. He had taken her loyalty for granted. He had assumed that because she never asked for a raise, Because she never complained about the hours. And because she never spoke of her own dreams. She didn't have any. He had been blinded by the same arrogance that had possessed Vanessa. The bus station was a desolate, cavernous place, echoing with the sounds of departure and regret. Adrian spotted her near the back, sitting on a hard plastic bench. She was wearing a coat over her uniform, a coat that looked too thin for the night air. Her head was down, and she was clutching a worn leather handbag to her chest as if it contained her entire life. He approached her slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the waiting area. He stopped a few feet away, feeling suddenly like an intruder. Lorraine didn't look up until his shadow fell over her. When she finally raised her head, her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. She didn't look angry. She didn't look hurt. She looked exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that reaches into the soul. "Mr. Adrian," she said softly, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He knelt on the dirty station floor, heedless of his expensive suit. "Lorraine, please, come home." She looked away, toward the bus that was idling at the gate, ready to take her far away from the life she had poured her heart into. "I've given this house everything, Adrian. I've held your hand through the fire. But I am not furniture. I am not something you can just clean off when the day is done. I have my granddaughter to think of, my Maya, and today I realize that the price of her education has been my own spirit. I can't pay that anymore." Adrian felt a crushing weight in his chest. "I know," he said, his voice thick with tears. "I am the one who let this happen. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to pay that price again. Not for Maya, not for me, not for anyone." He reached out, his hand trembling, and gently touched her arm. "Please, let me fix this. Not for the estate, not for the business, but for you." Lorraine looked at him, searching his face for the boys she used to raise. She saw the pain there, the genuine, agonizing realization of his own failings. And for the first time in 35 years, she saw Adrian as a man, not a master. "The bus is leaving soon, sir," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "Let it go," Adrian replied. "We have so much to talk about." The transition from the sterile, cold terminal of the bus station to the serene quiet of the estate felt like waking from a long, feverish dream. A month had passed since the night of the gala, and the Whitmore mansion had undergone a transformation. The cold, modern aesthetic imposed by Vanessa had been stripped away, replaced by a warmth that felt, for the first time in years, like a home. Vanessa's departure had been as absolute as it had been swift. Her influence in Atlanta's elite circles had evaporated the moment the footage went viral. Sponsors withdrew, and the charity boards she once sat upon removed her name with cold, mechanical efficiency. She had become a cautionary tale, a footnote in the history of a woman who had dared to think that pride was stronger than character. But for Lorraine, the changes were far more personal. She stood now at the back of a grand auditorium, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress, a far cry from the starched uniforms that had defined her existence. Beside her, Adrian sat, not as a master, but as a supporter. He had spent the last few weeks undoing the damage of decades. He had established the Lorraine Mitchell Scholarship in her honor, ensuring that her legacy would be defined not by the tasks she completed, but by the lives she helped build. On stage, the ceremony was reaching its crescendo. One by one, the medical students were being called to the podium to receive their white coats. "Maya Mitchell," the dean called out. Lorraine's heart stopped. She watched as her granddaughter, beautiful and radiant with intelligence, walked across the stage. Maya looked out into the crowd, her eyes finding Lorraine. She paused, a small, knowing smile breaking across her face, before she accepted the coat. As she slipped it on, the symbol of years of late-night studying, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief of the grandmother who had paid for every textbook and every meal. The audience erupted into applause. Adrian leaned in, his voice soft. "She's going to be a brilliant doctor, Lorraine. Because of you." Lorraine wiped a tear from her cheek, her smile steady and proud. "She's going to be a good one, Adrian. That's what matters." After the ceremony, as the hall cleared, Adrian walked to the center of the stage. The remaining guests turned, waiting to hear the man who had famously walked away from a billion-dollar merger to stand by his housekeeper. "We often talk about the great people of this world," Adrian said, his voice ringing clearly through the hall. "We look for them in boardrooms, in government, and on the covers of magazines. But true greatness isn't found in being served, or in the wealth we accumulate. The greatest people are the ones who never stop serving with love, even when the world forgets to see them." He stepped aside, gesturing toward Lorraine. "I am who I am today because of the woman who held me when I was lost, and the woman who taught me that dignity is not something that is given. It is something that can never be taken away, no matter how much paint you throw on it." Lorraine walked onto the stage, her stride confident and graceful. She didn't look like an antique or a piece of furniture. She looked like a woman who had endured the storm and emerged, not broken, but refined. "I didn't do it for the recognition," Lorraine told the audience, her voice steady and resonant. "I did it because I believed that character outlasts cruelty. Kindness is a long game, and patience is the strongest weapon we have." Weeks later, the estate was quiet and peaceful. Lorraine lived now in a beautiful, light-filled home overlooking the shimmering waters of Lake Lanier, a gift from Adrian that he insisted was merely a down payment on a debt he could never fully repay. She spent her mornings on the porch, watching the sun rise over the water, drinking tea and reading letters from Maya, who was now beginning her residency. The house was filled with flowers, books, and the silence of a life finally lived for herself. Adrian visited often, not as an employer checking on a house, but as a son checking on the woman who had truly raised him. They would sit on the deck, talking about the future of the scholarship or simply enjoying the Georgia breeze. The paint had long since washed away, and the memories of the humiliation had faded into the background of a life well lived. What remained was a powerful, enduring truth, that the people who serve with love will always, eventually, stand in the light. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes as the sun warmed her face. She was finally, truly home, not in a mansion of stone and ego, but in a life built on the unshakable foundation of her own dignity. And as she looked out over the lake, she knew that she hadn't just survived the world, she had outlasted it.